Martial arts mastery meets PC hardware muscle. Today we are benchmarking where wins meet on the absolute CPU king, the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, paired with the NVIDIA RTX 3090. Everything is running stock, no overclocks. Real quick, YouTube analytics tell me over 96% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. We are pushing hard for our 1,000 subscriber goal. If you want straight to the point benchmarks, flip that switch, smash subscribe, drop a like, and let's dive right into the numbers. Kicking off at 1080p, raw rendering, no upscalers. At the Ultra preset, this game is a visual feast. The lighting on the wet pavement and the sheer density of the foliage usually crush older CPUs, but the 9800X 3D is eating this alive. We are locked in at an incredible 120 FPS. The combat in Where Winds Meet is incredibly fast-paced. It's all about parries, dodges, and martial arts rhythm, so having that 120 FPS baseline at max settings feels amazing. When we drop down to the balanced preset, we start to trade off some of that distant shadow resolution and ambient occlusion accuracy. The trade-off is worth it if you have a high refresh monitor, as we jump up to a very solid 160 FPS. But if you are a competitive player and you want this to feel like an esports title, the performance preset is where things get wild. We are skyrocketing to 230 FPS. At this frame rate, the input latency is non-existent. You can react to enemy telegraphs instantly. It shows that even at 1080p, the RTX 3090 still has plenty of legs when paired with a CPU that doesn't bottleneck it. Moving up to 1440p. In my opinion, this is the sweet spot for the RTX 3090. That massive 24GB frame buffer loves higher resolutions. At 1440p Ultra, the image clarity is stunning. You can see the embroidery on the robes and the individual blades of grass much more clearly than at 1080p. Despite the increase in pixel count, the 3090 holds the line with a very cinematic and smooth 90 FPS. For a single-player open-world RPG of this fidelity, 90 FPS is basically the gold standard for immersion. Switching gears to the balanced preset at 1440p, we see the engine scaling very well. We break past the triple-digit barrier, sitting comfortably at 110 FPS. This is likely where most 3090 owners will want to live. You get that crisp 2K resolution without sacrificing that buttery smooth feel. Finally, at 1440p performance, we are hitting 140 FPS. This is practically matching the refresh rate of most high-end gaming monitors. If you are exploring the bustling cities or engaging in massive faction wars, this setting ensures you never see a stutter. Now, let's talk about upscaling. We are enabling FSR at 1080p Ultra, but we are stripping away the additional heavy anti-aliasing passes to see how the raw upscaler handles the image. Here is the interesting part. We are actually seeing 110 FPS, which is slightly lower than our native result of 120 FPS. You might be wondering why. At 1080p with a GPU as powerful as the 3090 and a CPU as fast as the 9800X 3D, the system is pushing frames so fast that the overhead of the FSR algorithm itself can sometimes introduce a tiny bottleneck, or we are simply hitting an engine limit where the GPU isn't fully utilized enough to benefit from upscaling. Visually, without the extra anti-aliasing smoothing things out, you do get a bit of shimmering on the trees and the rooftops. In a game with this much detailed vegetation, that shimmer can be distracting. Honestly, at 1080p with this hardware, native rendering is just the better choice. You aren't gaining frames here, you're actually losing a few and adding some visual noise. Let's see if the story changes at 1440p. We are keeping the settings at Ultra and enabling FSR, again without adding extra AA layers on top. Here, the upscaler starts to do its job properly. We are seeing 100 FPS, which is a 10-frame bump over our native 90 FPS result. Because the GPU has to work harder to render native 1440p, rendering at a lower internal resolution and upscaling it frees up just enough headroom to squeeze out that extra performance. However, is it worth it? We are going from 90 to 100. The game feels slightly smoother, but without the dedicated anti-aliasing passes to clean up the FSR image, you might notice some artifacts in motion, especially on the water reflections and the distant clouds. If you absolutely need to hit triple digits at 1440p Ultra, this is the way to do it. But the Messiah engine's native TAA is generally superior for image stability. Now we are going to focus purely on image stability. We are back at 1080p Ultra, but this time we are ensuring high-quality anti-aliasing is fully engaged to smooth out those jagged edges. We are seeing a rock-solid 120 FPS. This is the exact same number we saw in our raw benchmark. What does this tell us? It tells us that the anti-aliasing solution in Where Winds Meet is incredibly efficient. It is practically free in terms of performance cost on the RTX 3090. For a game that relies so heavily on aesthetics, the flowing robes, the intricate weapon designs, the cherry blossoms falling in the wind, you want that anti-aliasing on. It eliminates the stair-stepping effect on diagonal lines and makes the whole experience feel like a pre-rendered movie. Since it doesn't cost us any frames compared to the raw benchmark, there is absolutely no reason to turn this off at 1080p. Finally, let's look at 1440p Ultra with that same focus on anti-alias quality. Once again, we are hitting 90 FPS, mirroring our native results perfectly. This confirms that the RTX 3090 has more than enough bandwidth to handle edge smoothing without breaking a sweat. At 1440p, aliasing is naturally less visible because of the higher pixel density, but having that high-quality AA enabled just adds that final layer of polish. It makes the distant mountains look like a painting rather than a video game. If you are playing this game for the story and the immersion, this is the setting I recommend. 1440p, Ultra, AA maxed out. You get a consistent 90 FPS, which is plenty smooth, and the best possible image quality the game can offer. So, to answer the big question, is the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090 still enough for a next-gen graphical powerhouse like Where Winds Meet? The answer is a resounding yes. When you pair it with a CPU as capable as the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, you eliminate the stuttering that usually plagues open-world games. You are getting over 200 FPS at 1080p for competitive play, and a gorgeous, stable 90 to 100 FPS at 1440p Ultra. This card might be a generation old, but it is aging like fine wine. If this deep dive helped you optimize your settings or decide on your next upgrade, please help me out. We are chasing that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and every single sub counts. Click that button, drop a comment on which game you want to see the 3090 crush next, and I'll catch you in the next one.